A quick heads up before we jump into this week's episode. The Business of Physio 101 early bird pricing may have wrapped up. However, I've got a special discount code just for Health of Business podcast listeners. The Business of Physio 101 course is for anyone who works in the private sector and wants to understand business operations, contracts, compensation models, clinic finances, and just how business decisions actually affect your career. If you visit danielleboyd.ca/courses and select Business of Physio 101 and use the code podcast10 at checkout, you'll get an extra 10% off on your order. The link is also in the show notes, and I look forward to seeing you on March 11th when classes begin. Hello and welcome back to the Health of Business podcast. This episode is a bit of maybe more of an opinion piece, hopefully with some concrete stuff to back that up. But, I, over the last few years, have just really started to come to the realization that the fee-for-service model as an independent contractor in our healthcare system just doesn't really work anymore. Quite honestly, I think it's kind of broken, and there's a number of reasons why that I'll dive into. But, if you're a clinic owner or you're a clinician working at a clinic and you're an independent contractor receiving a fee split, I'd really encourage you to listen to this one the whole way through, because it's not quite the same as it used to be. And I just don't think it works anymore. I think there's better models out there that are safer for everyone, for the clinic owner, for the clinician, for the patient. So we're going to do a full deep dive into that. But before we start, I want to share that I've actually created a free decision-making matrix toolkit thing that by the time this episode is live should be free on my website. So if you go to danielleboyd.ca/free resources, there will be a PDF download here. And what this is a toolkit that helps you evaluate your staffing model, whether you're a clinic owner or you are a clinician. And it just kind of helps you, it just sort of gives you some, a matrix to work within that helps you realize what might be the best staffing option for you if you're a clinic owner, or what you might need to try to negotiate for your next contract as a clinician. So it kind of breaks down all these different models and helps decide what the best one might be. And it's kind of based on like how much experience your staff has, how much control and autonomy you want, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, danielleboyd.ca/free resources. And you'll see the clinic staffing decision matrix toolkit in there. So I hope that that's helpful. Feel free to pause right now and download that and work through it as we go through this episode. I think that might be super helpful. So anyways, part one is why I think it's not working anymore. So it's not that it's illegal or that it's, there's something like sinister happening there. I just think that there's better models out there. And with the level of control a lot of clinics have now, just in terms of sort of like the systems and the operations and the expectations and the KPIs that they're holding their staff accountable to, it doesn't really look like an independent contractor model at all, right? So with that level of control that a lot of clinics are trying to exert, an IC model just isn't working at all. So at the end of the day, what the IC model is supposed to be is, in theory, a clinician is an independent contractor. They're an independent business. They, assume their own risk based on the flexibility and the volatility of their income. They're supposed to, their costs are based on what kind of income they generate. And then in return, the clinic provides a space, equipment, admin, or whatever else for a percentage. And so in theory, the risk and reward are shared. But in reality, what we're actually seeing is that many clinics are also setting the fees. They're providing the patients, they're providing the booking, billing, and charting systems, Jane, et cetera. They're absorbing, possibly cancellations and no-shows. They're paying a fixed overhead. This is a really big one, regardless of how much volume their clinicians are seeing. And that overhead has continued to go up and up and up and up. Back in the 90s, overhead was a lot less than what it is now, right? And so reasonably, clinics are trying to insert a lot more control over, things like hours and how many people that clinicians are seeing, price structure, all of these things, right? So a lot of clinic owners, as a result of increased overhead, are exerting a lot more control over those types of things, which, is getting a little gray, if not a lot gray into the employee model, right? So that, and a lot of clinics are really leaning into culture, like things like uniforms, logos, business cards, like, lunch and learns, all these things that are collaborative and culture looking like, look a lot more like an employee model, right? So the other side of this too is, in reality, a lot of clinicians, on the fee for service IC model, aren't paying rent or anything at all when they're away. They're not required to provide a locum or a rent when they're away on vacation or whatnot. If they don't see patients, they're just like not getting paid, right? Like that's fine. They're not carrying any sort of risk or overhead with that. And they can totally just like reduce their hours or say they're not available or cut back when life changes, if so be it, it happens. But they don't have any financial obligation as a result of that, right? So that's the reality of the IC model right now. You earn what you get. You get your 60%, your, whatever percent of what your billings are. And if you're sick that day, you just don't get paid. But guess who's still paying the fixed overhead within that model, right? Like the clinic owner is, right? So the biggest reason here is ultimately that the financial risk sits almost entirely with the clinic owner. And this is the biggest issue for me, right? Like most fee for service IC models, the clinic carries the lease. They pay the administrative staff their wages. They pay for Jane or software. They're paying for the marketing. They're the ones that have the, general liability insurance. They're the ones that are taking all these fixed monthlies, yearlies, and carrying that, whether or not the contractor shows up that day. Right. So the clinic is the one that loses the money when the schedule's empty, right? So like if people no show or a clinician is sick that day and they clear their schedule, it's the clinic that's on the hook for that. They're still paying the front desk staff. They're still paying Jane for that day. All of those things are still happening on the shoulders of the clinic owner. So they also take the hit when someone takes a leave or goes on vacation. If someone goes on mat leave, now there's a huge opening right there. If someone goes on vacation, let's say someone wants to go away for a month, that entire month, there's no income generated, but the clinic owner still has to pay all of their overhead on a traditional IC model. So, I mean, for the clinician too, like their income obviously goes down if they work less, but that's not a financial, that's financial variability. That's not financial risk. They don't have a monthly overhead that they have to pay whether or not they come into work or if their income is flexible, right? They don't lose any money. They don't owe rent. They don't share any fixed monthly costs on the traditional fee for service IC model. So it is massive financial exposure and risk for the owner, but it's actually just like income loss for the clinician if they don't come in that day, or if the clients don't show up, or it just happens to be a slow day. They don't carry the risk that the clinic owner does in the traditional IC fee for service model, right? So then the other piece of this then is, so now the clinic is responsible. Yeah, we've just discussed that. They have this like huge financial overhead. And yet the clinics are also typically in this model responsible for, patient access. So like patients finding them, like marketing, hosting that website, all of that stuff, the continuity of care, right? So if that clinician doesn't show up that day and they're sick, now it's on the clinic administratively to find, another clinician for that patient, or to like reschedule them or whatever that looks like, right? And that comes within their administrative fee. Sure, whatever. But on the day they don't show up, the administration has to do all the work to like rebook the patient, and they're not actually paying for that, right? The clinic is also responsible for if they're direct billing on their behalf, which is quite gray, for, making sure that the clinician is doing everything correctly, the regulation, all those like compliance issues. The clinic is still responsible for all of that. Um, yeah, and just ultimately keeping the clinic operational. The clinic owner is still responsible for all of those things. So, in a contractor model, the clinic owner cannot, they have all this responsibility to, financially for overhead, but also just like we said, like administration, keeping the clinic going, marketing, all these things. But in an IC arrangement, if we're going by the textbook, clinic owners cannot require a minimum number of hours. They can't control start or end times. They can't control vacation. They can't control leaves, all of these things, right? If there's a schedule gap, there's nothing they can do about it, right? Like as an independent contractor, the clinic owner really has no control over hours or, coverage, these types of things. Like, it's really, really challenging, right? So if that staff member wants to go away on a 3-week vacation, the owner can't stop them, right? Like there's nothing the owner can do. And so now there's just 3 weeks worth of fee split that the clinic owner is missing out on now, right? So it's not actually that the independent contractor is like truly an independent risk absorbing business like they should be. It's actually just like kind of a huge, it's an even bigger risk for the clinic owner. Like, yeah, it's a huge risk to take on all this financial burden of like having the space, but it's also a huge risk to take on an IC. Taking on an independent contractor means you're the one that's also absorbing all the risk and like financial overhead when that person is away or sick or on vacation or on an extended leave, right? So it's actually just like double risk for the clinic owner and like just maybe a little bit of income loss for the independent contractor, right? So it's like actually quite misaligned when you look at it from that lens. And so when you have unpredictable income as an owner, now you can't make plans. You can't financially plan when your income is a percentage of billings and yet your overhead is fixed, right? So like if you have fixed overhead but an unpredictable income, like that's really challenging, right? In a fee for service model. So like let's say it's July. You've got 6 practitioners. July rent is not different than October rent, right? Like these things are like it's month to month. So let's say it's July and, 3 out of your 6 practitioners decide to take 2 to 4 weeks of holidays in July and you have no control over that. You might go backwards that month, right? Like your fixed overhead isn't going anywhere. But if half your staff want to take a month off or go on vacation or go camping or reduce their hours massively that month, you might actually be operating at a loss that month and then be clawing your way back the next month to make up for that. So having unpredictable income in an IC model as a clinic owner is like massively destabilizing. It really like prevents you from making financial plans or, like it'll dip into your rainy day slush funds. Like it's just really chaotic, right? Like it just makes for, and it also makes for really poor coverage for patients, right? So like if those 3 people decide to leave in July, now there might not be that continuity of care for your patients and they might not come back because maybe they needed their treatments during that and they find someone else and go elsewhere, right? And then again, you have no control over that. You can't mandate that, you can't say, oh, so and so is going on holiday that month. So, like, you can't take vacation that month. We're going to plan it out and we're going to spread it out and we're going to even the load and the risk or whatever month to month. You don't have that ability because they're ICs, right? So there's no reliable income on a month to month basis when you have fee for service ICs. So, right, like it makes it hard to offer raises to your admin staff when it's unpredictable, invest in new equipment, pay yourself as an owner consistently. Like these things are really unstable when you have unpredictable income and a fee for service model with independent contractors. You can still have a fee for service model with an employee. That's different because you have way more control over scheduling, right? Like you can be way more intricate and way more specific around hours and expectations there, right? So when you have no control and all the risk, it's a terrible model. And yet somehow we found ourselves in a scenario in BC and in fact across the province where like that's just the reality of it. Like it doesn't really make sense to me, right? And then a huge piece of this also is like the CRA. So, yes, I've laid this out in a way that is like if they're an IC, you have no control over their schedule and blah 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 blah, but like Many clinic owners are not doing that. They are trying to control the IC schedules and vacation and hours and all these things because of that risk, right? So they know the risk. They're having these variable income months and they're saying, no, you can't take vacation. They're trying to mandate that. So now we're bleeding into this like blurry CRA definition. And should the CRA decide to audit that clinic, the owner and the clinician are going to be in huge trouble because now it looks way more operationally like they're an employee if there is that level of control, right? So now we're in this like muddy, murky scenario where clinic has all the risk, financially, legally, etc. IC can, come in or not. They can do whatever they want to. And if the clinic owner tries to take back any control, it looks like they're an employee and the whole thing just, turns to mud. So it's actually like a really unhealthy model as far as I'm concerned. So that's my opinion as to why it is, a broken system. So I do have some suggestions for other models, but we'll get there. Right. And here are some other reasons why that line gets blurred too, right? So in many clinics, some of the offers that clinic owners are making, so things, for example, like mentorship or bonuses or incentives, KPI bonuses, things like that, even team culture. So things like uniforms or like business cards for everyone, email addresses for everyone, everyone's on the website under the same brand, blah, 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 all these things. Those are creeping into employee territory, right? So if an employer or a clinic owner is trying to give someone a performance bonus or a welcome bonus or mentorship as an independent contractor, now they've blurred the lines into employees. Those are things that are designated specifically for employees again. So now those people are not fully independent. They've tried to do those things to incentivize their staff to come on or stay or whatnot. And it just totally blurs the lines. And we've got a mess now in our ecosystem where we have clinic owners that are hiring ICs that are, trying to control their hours, trying to give them mentorship and bonuses and things like that. And we've got an absolute business structure and CRA disaster. And honestly, I feel like it's built on a house of cards. It just takes one or two audits for them to discover that this is kind of just the way it is and just go knock the dominoes down and audit left, right, and center. And I really, really, truly feel like this model is broken because no one is doing it correctly in the sense that they're taking on the risk and it's going just fine, right? Like no one is taking on this financial risk, hiring ICs and like, things are going tickety boo. Like it seems like anyone who has an IC that is doing it correctly is more and more stressed. Things are more and more volatile. Expenses are going higher and higher. And so then resultingly and reasonably, clinic owners are trying to exert more and more control, bleeding the lines, offering more incentives, bleeding the lines and blurring things into an employee model. And that's exactly the mess we find ourselves in now. And you cannot call yourself an independent contractor if you're getting things like mentorship or having your hours controlled or vacation controlled. And yet for the clinic owner, it is incredibly risky. So for those reasons, I truly feel that model is broken. So sure, that's well and good. But why does it matter? Like why is this conversation important? Well, it's not just a business owner issue. This is super important because financial volatility or, uncertainty creates stress in the workplace. And when clinic owners are stressed, it becomes a toxic workplace. We can end up with areas of burnout. We can have clinic culture fall apart. It can become toxic. And we end up in a scenario where, like we're getting audited and it just ultimately pulls the profession down when we're known for not doing things correctly, right? Like just because it's the way it's always been doesn't mean it's the way it should be or that it's being done correctly, right? So as a clinic owner, if this is the scenario we find ourselves in, we're stressed, financially strapped. We can't make predictable income and predictable growth patterns within our structures. And we just end up in a cycle of burnout, toxicity, and it just like creates kind of a mess, right? And so for the clinicians, so that's why it's important for clinic owners, but for clinicians, You also need to know if you're an independent contractor and being treated like an employee, it's not just the clinic when they get audited that's going to pay taxes, it's you too. Because your tax structure as an independent contractor, whether you're incorporated or a sole prop, when you do your year end and your taxes are calculated based on being a contractor. If your taxes were to have been calculated on you being an employee, they would be structured a lot differently. And you would actually probably owe a lot of money because all those write offs that you're benefiting from right now don't exist anymore. Now you have to go back, do your taxes all over again, and all those write-offs that you have been benefiting from, like the kilometers on your car, the meals that you've been buying, the equipment you've been buying, all those things that you've been doing because you're a business owner. If you are reclassified as an employee, you are going to have to back pay all of that too. It's not just the clinic owner who's going to get stuck with a huge tax bill, it's you too. So that's why it's super, super important for clinicians as well. And here's the rub. As a clinician, it's easy to assume your clinic owner knows what they're doing. A lot of them don't, and I say that with love in my heart. A lot of clinic owners aren't doing things maliciously. They're doing things because that's just the way it's always been. And the contract you signed was probably the contract they were given as a contractor at some point in their career, right? So it's not because these people are malicious or predatory or anything like that. It's just because, again, it's the way it's always been. We are in a system where we've never learned anything about business. Business is not taught in school. All of these things are just what we've learned and acquired by bits and pieces and through zigzagging through our careers and mixing and matching and the experiences we've had at different clinics. And as a result, we've ended up in a mess. No one has learned anything about what correct business structure looks like, what the CRA is actually doing. And until a clinic actually gets audited, it's so easy to just be like, oh, it's fine. It's never happened to me. It's not a risk, whatever. Right. But here's the thing, you as an independent contractor, you need to know this too, because if that clinic gets audited, you also get audited. And if things get reclassified, both of you are on the hook for a massive tax bill. So it's not just the clinic owner who needs to know this. You need to know this too, because just because you've got a great gig where you get to walk in and, get paid if you work, you don't get paid if you don't work, and you carry no risk, you actually carry a massive risk here. Because if you are reclassified as an employee, like I said, it's going to be a big bill. And also penalties, right? Like it's not just going to be a big bill, it's going to be like red flags, it's going to be interest, it's going to be a lot, right? So this is really, really, really important for both parties to understand. So the other piece of this too is like, it's also really important for patients. Like from a compliance and regulatory standpoint, the college is obviously out here to protect the public. It's important that the public know who they're dealing with, like what sort of business entity they're dealing with. Is it a corporation? Are they paying to the clinic? Are they paying to the provider? All these things need to be transparent, right? And for patients too, it's really important that they have access to care. Like if there is a month, like I described, where half your clinicians are away on holiday, now they have nowhere to go and they are probably going to go elsewhere. They might go find another practitioner in that time frame, right? So it's just like not great for our schedules and our practices. So it's really important to make sure we don't have these weird schedule gaps or like long wait times or disruptions in that continuity of care for patients. Like that ultimately at the end of the day is who we serve. And so if patients are struggling to access or, uncertain about who's actually being paid or whatever, that's huge. So really being transparent here and also, keeping the client in mind at the end of the day is essential. So yeah, this is obviously my opinion. Other people may not share it. Other people may have had different experiences. Maybe you've been through a CRA audit and actually have been in a scenario where they've decided it actually was fine. Hey, whatever. I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear your experience. I'd love to hear, your thoughts on this. But there are other ways of doing it, right? Like the IC fee for service isn't the only model. And a lot of clinics are going to employee models or full rent models. Like the IC fee for service kind of lives in the gray zone. It's kind of in the middle. And so, in my opinion, I feel like if you're going to be a clinic owner, you need to kind of lean one way or the other. If you want to have an employee model, fantastic. If you want that level of control over hours, vacation schedule, those types of things, culture, employee model is a great way of doing it. If you want your staff to remain autonomous and flexible and all of those things, probably better to go to a rent model or like a base rent plus commission model where at least your fixed overhead is covered and there's risk on both parties, right? So like the fee for service I see just lives too much in the gray zone, and the risk is just way too high on the clinic owner end of things. And then when that becomes too risky and the clinic owner tries to overreach with control, then it looks like an employee, and then a CRA audit would just all hell would break loose, right? So in my opinion, it's best to go one way or another. So let's break those down, right? So let's look at let's match the model to what's best in each scenario, right? Like this isn't about like everyone should be an employee or like being a contractor is bad or illegal. It's very much about finding the model that works best for everyone that's involved. And, I also think it's super important that in an interview, the clinic owner is really transparent about what that looks like, but also I want people being interviewed to be empowered with these questions and this knowledge too, like coming into an interview and being able to say, hey, are you an employee or a contractor model? What does that look like? Like, I really want people to be empowered there, right? And to know what they're signing so that they can feel safe in the event of a CRA audit. So, option one, like I said, is to lean into more of an employee model. And this is great, especially for like early career physios. They don't have a caseload. So you put them on a fee for service IC model and like they're probably not going to be bringing much in anyway. And they're going to want predictability and mentorship and coordination and culture and integration and all those things, right? So for early career physios and healthcare practitioners, an employee model is actually probably fantastic. And there's lots of ways of doing this, right? You can pay them hourly. You could just straight up pay them hourly. And the benefit of paying them hourly is that if they don't have a full schedule, they can do other things, right? Like if they are, in for 8 hours, but they're only doing 4 hours worth of treatment, that other 4 hours, they could be, maybe at the front desk, or maybe they're writing a blog for your website, or maybe they're folding laundry, or maybe they're shadowing another clinician, right? Like you actually get to dictate how they're using their time when they are an employee, obviously making sure that that's in the contract and that expectation is made clear ahead of time, because adding that after the fact wouldn't be great. But if you're paying them by the hour and they're not seeing a patient, then great. You get to utilize them in the clinic. So yeah, maybe it is that they're doing some cleaning, or they're like writing some content, or they're shadowing the front desk and learning the ropes there, or they're shadowing another clinician, or, doing some training or whatever it is, right? So hourly actually can be a really fantastic model. Um, Another model that we see often in the employee structure is a fee for service or a commission based model as well. Just because the fee for service works well in the IC doesn't mean it doesn't work for employees. We see this structure often, right? So we see it where they are receiving a fee for service, but then the clinic owner is also paying their CPP, their EI, their WorkSafe, their taxes, all of that, right? So that can be a great model, or, a hybrid of hourly and commission can also work really great. Maybe they have a smaller hourly rate, but then they have a smaller commission that you add on top of their treatment times to incentivize them to be seeing more treatments, right? So that can be a really healthy option in the middle, right? So you don't have to be a contractor to be on a fee for service or a commission models. So the benefit of this for a clinic owner, like I said, is like you really get to coordinate their schedule, be in charge of coverage, vacation, timing, all of that stuff. And then you can also provide them with lots of clarity and mentorship and, bonuses and incentives and all of those things, right? And you can just be way more transparent with your expectations, as well as their income. Like their income is way more predictable. Your outgoing, cash flow is way more predictable as well too. So, even if they're not generating a lot of income, your outgoing income is way more predictable. So you can be more aware of what you need to charge and how you need to, like, what strings you need to pull in order to make sure your cash flow is adequate. So, and the benefits for the staff member is that, yeah, like again, they get predictable income, they get mentorship, they are, probably going to be way more wrapped in and enveloped in the culture. And it just is like, a way, yes, they've lost a lot of independence there, but they're gaining so much in the sense of like predictability, support, education, mentorship, and, expectation clarity. So I think in that sense, that's a beautiful model to lean into if you want to go more down the like control predictability route. So now if you want to lead more into the independent contractor piece and you really want to allow full independence, like hands off, the cleanest model here is just straight rent. Base flat rent. The clinician maybe even has their own Jane. They have their own what is it, terminal. They collect all of their income and at the beginning of the month they just pay you rent. Whatever it is, there's different ways of calculating base rent. I have some formulas. If that's something you're trying to figure out, get a hold of me. I can absolutely help you figure out what to charge from a base rent perspective, because there's a lot of inputs to that. But that is the cleanest contractor model. And a note on that too, if you have a multidisciplinary clinic, by now my corporate structure episode should be out. Highly recommend you listen to it. If you are a multidisciplinary clinic, your corporate permit only allows you to bill for the healthcare profession for which you're permitted. So say you're a physiotherapy corporation, you can only bill for physiotherapy. So if you have RMTs and chiros and other professions working there, you actually are not allowed to bill on their behalf. And that is a regulatory college legislation piece. So the cleanest way there to do that is to have other, disciplines just pay you rent. So then that way it's clean from a corporate structure standpoint as well. So the cleanest, truest, independent contractor model is base rent at the beginning of the month. They collect their own money and then pay you rent at the beginning of the month. And then that way your fixed income is covered, it's predictable, and there's no loss if that clinician goes away, right? If the room is empty, rent is still due, doesn't really matter. And the risk is shared. You're not the only one taking on all of this financial risk, right? Like you're not the one who eats rent and all the costs that go out on a monthly basis if that staff member wants to go on vacation. Yeah, the continuity and coverage of care might not be there, but really at the end of the day, that's the responsibility of the clinician because they are an independent contractor operating their own business out of your space. So that's the cleanest, truest model. There is kind of a like hybrid transition in the middle of that. So you could do, kind of like there's a hybrid hourly commission for employee. You could do a smaller base rent and commission for an independent contractor. And this might be a nice model to start someone on if they have been an employee and they've built their caseload and they're ready to take on a little bit more risk. Doing a base rent plus commission can be a really nice way to do that. So you still protect your fixed costs. You still have that shared rent, shared financial risk component of it, but you're gradually shifting the risk instead of completely just like putting it in one sense or the other, right? So if you wanted to transition someone from an employee to an independent contractor, always having a base rent of some sort is going to be essential for protecting both parties when it comes to that CRA model, right? So ultimately, like we said, the best model is pure rent when it comes to the CRA model. But if you wanted to do a hybrid, if you wanted to still have a fee for service within the IC model, you still need a small base rent. And even if it's just enough to cover the overhead, if it just meets your overhead for the month, sure, fine, whatever. There's different calculations. The financials of that are going to be different and whatever. We can dive into that if you're, wanting to do some consulting around that. But ultimately, having a base rent is essential to financial shared risk and really proving to the CRA that this is actually an independent model. So that might be a nice transition point so that independent contractor can kind of like learn the ropes and get there and then eventually just go full rent. So Yeah, those are some of the models that I would probably encourage people, like, I see fee for service in the middle, not great for either party, you know? Yes, it's way more beneficial for the clinician, and right now a lot of clinic owners are so desperate for clinicians that they're happy to do that and give absolutely ridiculous fee splits. But at the end of the day, when the CRA does do that audit, it's really risky for the clinician as well. Like I said, all those write-off benefits you've been getting, say goodbye to them when the CRA audits you and asks for them back when you're reclassified. So, anyway, all of that to say, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just different. And it's my personal opinion. Someone might not agree with me. Someone might, have been through an experience that proved otherwise. And I'm totally open to hearing about it. In fact, let's record a podcast episode. I want to hear how that all went for you. But at the end of the day, I think we need to be a lot clearer around what our models look like and either lean more into an employee model or more into an independent contractor model. Living in the gray zone is just too risky now. And I think again, for our profession to really continue to move forward and be elevated in the eye of the public and just feel safer in general, we need to start shifting our contracts and we need to start elevating our business knowledge, right? Like we really need to start exploring that and shifting the way we are doing things because it's dangerous, right? And I have heard of clinics under audit by the CRA. It is happening. It's not something that like, oh, that won't happen to me. Like it does happen. It really, truly does happen. And when it does happen, it can be detrimental. It can be career ending. Like it can absolutely decimate you financially. So I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but I really think, especially with HPOA coming in, we got to be really careful about this stuff because we just like there's a lot of change happening and I think it's really important that we protect our businesses. And that's what I'm here to do. So yeah, like I said, if any of that resonated with you, go ahead and download that matrix, that toolkit to look at your. It's just basically a comparison and some checklists and some tick boxes that help you look at your own model and to see what actually might work best for you in regards to a structure. So it just kind of helps you decide where the risks and control balance lives for you, and then helps you identify maybe any red flags in your own clinic. And this is for both clinic owners and clinicians. This isn't just for one or the other. And then it might help you figure out what model fits you best as an owner or a clinician, and just kind of facilitate a bit more transparency within your business. So, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant. I'm just kind of, this is more of an opinion piece again, but if you do need any like legal or accounting support, definitely go to your third party contractor that you've hired to draft up all of these things to look at your structure. But again, if you want to make any changes, I am more than happy to consult on that because that's something that's absolutely in my wheelhouse. This is my favorite stuff. It's my jam. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And yeah, let me know if you think differently or if you agree or yeah, where things are at because honestly, I really feel like things need to change in our industry and would love to see the momentum shift in that direction as well too. So, thanks for listening, and I hope you got lots out of this episode.